Hi, everyone. Welcome, and thanks for tuning in to the Journey to Middle School. Please feel free to ask, if you're joining us live, to ask any questions throughout. You can just drop them in the chat. I will do my best to keep up with them throughout, but we'll also save time at the end to answer questions as well. This afternoon, I'm going to share more about the middle school program in general, and then also share areas of growth and plans ahead. And so I wanted to start with saying really the reasons that you chose Bennett, whenever your child or your children started here, should still carry through when they are adolescents. So Bennett is a progressive program that prioritizes meaningful activity in learning and participation in classroom democracy. And here we truly put the students at the center, believe that students must be invested in what they're learning, and that the curriculum must be relevant to the students' lives. And really, our adolescents need this even more to be engaged, more so than our early childhood or lower school students. Recently, in a conversation I was having with an upper school teacher, when I asked what Bennett does differently, what he responded with was kind of a reference to saying that here we're not trying as teachers trying to shoehorn real world opportunities for application, but instead, we build classes around what is real and applicable to them. And this is the model and how we've designed our program. As someone who is a former middle school teacher, middle schoolers know when it's inauthentic. You work hard to have these kind of engaging and real world application, but if they're forced in, they know, and they can see right through that. So we design the model of how we've designed our program is really for that application. And then this is why you see joy in learning in our adolescents. And that is unique. Having worked with middle schoolers for a long time, my entire career, it is unique to see how much joy they have in learning, how excited they are to come to school, for as excited as middle schoolers can be. But I taught middle school for 5 years, actually, prior to coming to Bennett, and was also an administrator of 4th through 8th graders before joining here. And I never once had a student ask me if they could skip recess or specials classes to work on a project. And that happens all the time here. Usually those are their outlets to get away from classes or classes that they feel are boring or they aren't engaged, even if they loved their teachers. So here you just see that kind of excitement and joy for learning in their project work still in the middle school. If you can move to the next slide. I know these words can be jarring when looking at them to describe adolescence, but here's what we know about what adolescents feel about today in school. And there are ongoing surveys every year. We use Challenge Success, which is out of Stanford University, which is really an assessment of engagement and also mental health of adolescents that's used for middle and high school students. But students are saying their top words of describing school are tired, bored, and stressed. And this is not what we want our adolescent school experience to be. We know that there are many studies that'll show us that interest and curiosity have a direct correlation with memory and learning. If we think about us as adults, things that we are curious about stick with us and we're eager to learn more about. And we know that school today just isn't doing that. One of Dr. Hurst, one of our teachers here, shared that coming from GEMS and prior independent schools, is that it's great to see curious students coming into class, but also that they leave even more curious, which is incredible. So we survey our students every year through Challenge Success, our 5th through 12th grade students in the spring. And it's about their school experience, their engagement, and how they're feeling overall towards school in 5th through 12th grade. So nationally, and I shared these at a previous community address, and I will share the results again at a one this year. But nationally, it was found that 77% of adolescents said they experienced stress-related health symptoms, 77%. Here at Bennett, we had 13% of students respond saying they had experienced stress-related health symptoms. Nationally, 95% of adolescents are saying they're sleep deprived. Almost all adolescents are saying they're sleep deprived. So something is going on. We know there's a lot of things changing with their body. There's a lot of things happening socially that are keeping them up and on their phones at night. There's a lot of different things that feed into that. But I will dig into a little bit of how school is a big part of that too. Here we had less than half of our students say that they're sleep deprived. 62% of students nationally said that workload is a major source of stress. And so if we think of that workload, that homework, the studying, cramming for tests, 62% are saying that it's a major source of stress. Also, somehow they're still bored, but they're definitely going to be tired from all that time it's taking. Whereas at Bennett, we had 13% of students say that workload is a major source of stress. Overall, 47% of students nationally said they're disengaged or simply doing school. That's devastating to hear that for middle and high school students, half of them are saying that they're disengaged or simply doing school. And to me, that's unacceptable. Recently, Marty Moran, who's our head of program for middle and upper school, sat on a neighborhood parent network panel, and the focus was on what schools are doing to support adolescents' mental health. It was really interesting to hear. A lot of what was shared, I thought, for me as a listener, was very disappointing as a parent and as an educator of adolescents. That so much of the response was on students adding this stress to themselves and this pressure to do better, to get all of the A's, to do, to be the top, and to share that these students are putting these pressures on themselves and not really reflect on the environment that's been created that is driving that was disappointing. Or to hear even that the levels of stress around test prep and things that come with adolescence and school experience is so stressful at the high school level that one of the schools shared, so they start that preparation earlier. So it's a stressful thing, and so instead of addressing it, we're kind of now starting it earlier on. And so we know that things like workload and increasing homework, the research is showing us that it adds to levels of stress. We have these measures, sleep deprivation, and it really does have limited academic gains. So here at Bennett, we focus on practicing and building in executive function skills without the loading of homework, the studying and cramming, and the memorization of content, so that students can apply these skills when needed. And this is always a big shift for middle schoolers in their school experience, is when maybe they were a child that loved school all along, but all of this, the cramming, the studying, the homework load drastically increases and is impacting their well-being. And a lot of times you see that love of school start to deteriorate in some of our kids. So how we practice these executive function skills, an example of this is scrum boards. A scrum board, some of you might be familiar with at work. It's a visual project, kind of a project management tool, and it helps a group or an individual visualize items in work in progress. And so things like this support task organization, distribution of work, planning, and time management. And all of this is done in school. Our experience in school, and I know mine was used to studying, completing homework at home, having to manage all of that on our own, which was kind of like a sink or swim mentality. If you were able to teach yourself how to take notes from the textbook, you were able to cram and make flashcards in your own ways. It might have taught us how to persevere and stick with something. When I see our students prepping for demonstration days, which I'll talk a little bit about more later, the end, kind of the culmination of their trimester's work, I see that same sink or swim sentiment where they have to work hard and really buckle down to make it work. But all of this is built into their school experience, and they have teacher support, and it isn't taking away from things like their sleep. Although I have had some parents share that they could not get their kids to stop working on their projects at home because they were so excited about it. That seems a little different. So at those points, maybe they're lacking a little sleep. If you can move to the next slide. Thank you. So our 5th through 12th graders this last spring were surveyed, as I mentioned, through Challenge Success. And these were the top 3 words that they used to describe their school experience: unique, welcoming, and engaging. Our 5th through 12th graders said this. That is very generous if you think about how adolescents kind of describe things. And so why I wanted to start with this is our top priority: to have healthy and happy adolescents that are well prepared for the future. Our graduates in the upper school and our ongoing test scores that we have in middle and upper school are proof that they can do just as well by traditional academic measures, but enjoy school. They're happy, they're healthy, they remember what they're learning, and they can apply things to new situations. They're building their muscles for lifelong learning. They're curious, they're reflective, and they can reskill and retool. I think it's important to keep in mind that the structure and the size of the middle school as it is currently and what it will grow into, which I will specifically share details this afternoon, allows these things to be true and will continue, allows these words to be what the students are sharing. I've shared at a previous community address at the beginning of this year, and actually a talk on the middle school program about the importance of self-regulation. It's a part of our portrait of a graduate, which are the skills that we want our students to have when they graduate. Self-regulation has really become recognized for its foundational role in promoting well-being across the lifespan, so of young children through adulthood, including educational achievement and physical, emotional, social, and economic health. Self-regulation is really that ability to manage your thoughts and feelings to enable goal-directed actions. And it includes a variety of behaviors that we need for success in school, for success in relationships, the workplace as adults. Self-regulation isn't just innate. It needs to be supported and developed. So the graph here, which I've shared a few times, represents a theoretical model of the balance of a young person's capacity for self-regulation and the need for adult support. And one way of thinking about this ratio of a young person's capacity and the adult support is that for optimal functioning in the moment, children and adolescents need to have their self-regulation bucket filled. So a child or an adolescent, they have the ability to fill their self-regulation bucket to kind of varying levels. And for them to be able to successfully manage their thoughts and feelings and behaviors, they need caregivers to provide co-regulation that fills the remainder of the bucket. And caregivers are those critical adults in their lives. So that's you, the parents and guardians, and that's also the teachers that they spend, most of their days with. And so looking at the red ovals in the graph here, and why I always love to share this graph, is that there are two clear developmental periods where children and youth's abilities to self-regulate can increase dramatically due to just the kind of changes in brain development at the time. And these are early childhood, our pre-Kers and our JKers, and early adolescence, our middle schoolers. During these periods, co-regulation, so that support from those adults, which includes their teachers, can capitalize on readiness to build and practice new self-regulation skills. So in adolescence are the ages of our middle through our upper school students. Their brain architecture is kind of undergoing major changes. For those of you that have adolescents at home, you see that in different ways. It brings both benefits and then challenges. Around kind of self-regulation. But in early and mid-adolescence, so early adolescence being middle school age and mid-adolescence being the upper school age, brain systems that process emotions and seek rewards are more developed than the cognitive control systems that are responsible for good decision-making and future planning. So this means that teens are biased towards choices that offer short-term reward rather than long-term benefit. And their emotions heavily influence their decisions. So for those of you that have adolescents at home, you may be sighing, kind of knowing exactly what I'm talking about. But so when you think about, given that poor decisions that occur during adolescence, they can have long-term negative consequences. And this is not the time for caregivers to really step back from their supportive roles. And by caregivers, again, it's not just parents and guardians, but it's teachers too. Teachers play a large role in this. Co-regulation support during this developmental period is crucial. It is crucial in the middle school. So then why are schools designed in middle school with such large numbers in classes, with students shifting from class to class, teacher to teacher? There's definitely less of relationships as students enter middle school between the student and teachers when kids are shifting past the elementary years into the middle and high school years. Students become one of many that teachers see every day. And for as much as we want, of course, to have a true middle school and high school experience, this doesn't have to be at the expense of those relationships with the adults. You can still have different teachers while having teachers that see you and know you and have deep relationships with you. So really that balance of maintaining closer relationships with caregivers is critical in middle school. And so here at Bennett, most of this support and relationship building is during advisory. And so our middle school students have 60 minutes of advisory daily. It's about 45 minutes in the morning and about 15 minutes at the end of the day. The end of the day is more kind of a wrap up, check out, pack up of the day, any reminders maybe for the next day. But in that morning time, relationships are a priority. There is a smaller student to teacher ratio, so 12 to 1 maximum. So even if there's a class section of 24, there would be 2 advisors where they would have spaces, and it's always consistent that you have your advisory with a smaller group with 12 max. Relationships and community building and connection is the main priority of this time. And so sometimes connection and just time to be silly is what they need. Our adolescents still need to be kids. They still need to be silly. To have opportunities to be social and independent in a space with a caregiver, think about what kind of like a deeper relationship that is than just kind of that teacher-student, as the teacher as that authoritative figure. And then in that advisory time, it is first and foremost focused on relationship and kind of team building and community, but then there's balance between set curriculum, individualized support, and current group needs. It's also really important to kind of look at the current group and the needs of that community, to keep community, to address any problems or concerns, and to always kind of come back together as a group. And so I did want to share a little bit of what does that set curriculum look like. And so when I say set curriculum, is that there are standards, and they are based on social emotional standards and actually a lot of anti-bias framework and support for students. It is not every day there is this plan, but I wanted to share with you trimester 1 content so that you get a sense. So as I mentioned, since relationship community building is first, and then the needs of the current group comes first, it's always changing and looks different. But then with trimester 1, there is content that does need to be infused during advisory. So this is an outline of trimester 1's planned curriculum that's drawn from. And so there's multiple resources here. It looks different in different advisories depending on the students that are in front of you, which is important. But you see kind of the topic areas here. So the content of starting with around identity of my strengths and values, my group identities, celebrating them, then moving into positive relationships. After positive relationships comes empathy and perspective taking. After that comes conflict resolution, and conflict resolution in the trimester has different focus areas: a focus on conflict, a focus on resolution, and then when it's not directly about you. And so advisory is when conflict and reflection is probably discussed most. And so this is a difference from the lower school years. It's where the group's current needs are met around things like behavior expectations for the class and for each other and our kind of community norms. It's where, and they're so much more engaged as they're old enough to be reflective in those conversations. Middle schoolers have much more independence and choice. So disruption and class accountability is different when students are more accountable to themselves and the choices they make. But when it does impact the class community, advisory is a space where there are reflective and restorative conversations, whether they be for the full group or small group. This is where the counselor joins a lot and may lead across the whole middle school, across a grade. For example, right before break, Thanksgiving break, and actually I believe continuing on now, our middle school counselor and our director of DEI are leading advisory for the 7th and 8th graders right now. And that's based on kind of current group dynamics. And so it's ongoing support based on the students that are in front of them. And then lastly, the topics that were covered under the trimester were digital citizenship. Some of this is sometimes used during advisory, or it might also be infused in some of their PBL time if that's more appropriate when they're doing research. But this is just kind of an outline of that set curriculum that's there, knowing that the first priority are those relationships. So then I wanted to share more about project-based learning in the middle school. Our approach to project-based learning doesn't change, it just increases in complexity throughout the years. So in the early childhood, approach to project work is emergent, and it balances student interest and careful observation. So those teachers are really like carefully observing the students at play, what are their interests, and then from there, the projects kind of emerge. In the middle school, our approach to project work balances competency coverage, which I'll talk more about the competencies. So that's kind of the core curriculum. So it balances competency coverage and student inquiry. So we still teach traditional elements. And I think it's important to say, there's still explicit teaching of science, history, writing, math, etc. It's integrated and it includes student inquiry and interest. So without the typical courses that was probably our experience in middle and high school, I thought it was important to show how this all laid out. So we do not have a typical physics class or a biology class or a science class or a US or world history or geography or ancient civilizations or US government. But we do have competency maps in both the middle and upper school that have the list of intended skills or competencies to be covered. And the creation of those maps were used state standards, national standards and benchmarks, research and expertise from professionals in the field, such as university professors, as well as the expertise of our faculty. So while the map kind of incorporates what we would consider the standard grade level expectations, our design gives us so many more opportunities to engage our learners in the process of their development, kind of highlighting their strengths and their areas for growth. And it's not forcing every aspect of learning and development by using a standard grade level curriculum or program and providing space for students' ability to master a skill or competency over time. So let's look at the middle school journey. And so I've used this to outline and share before kind of how to juxtapose what might have been our experience if we had, a U.S. history class, an earth science class. PBL, our project-based learning, is really designed to have a driving subject in either the sciences or the social sciences, with the other being secondary, and an integration of related math and English language arts and research topics. So all of the content is divided over the entire middle school journey, so over the 5th through 8th grade journey. So for science, earth, life, and physical sciences are still covered. Students just don't sit in a class on one of them all year without applying or connecting that knowledge. So let's look at earth science, for example. So look at the pink stars here, because there's a lot going on in this chart. So if you look at the pink stars, that's earth science specifically. You can see throughout the middle school experience, there are 4 semesters worth, so the 4 pink stars, 4 semesters worth or trimesters worth of earth science content. This matches other schools. So as most 5th grade programs are designed to actually be an integration of all 3 sciences of earth, life, and physical. And then starting in 6th grade is when they kind of segment out, where you typically have an earth science class, most likely in 6th grade, a life science in 7th grade, and 8th grade is typically always physics. And that's because there are elements of physics that require more high order math, but there's plenty of physics that our 5th graders are able to do and apply too. So you see across all of them, you have the 4 trimesters, which would be comparable. Our project-based learning classes are 90 minutes in the middle school. So if you think of having a typical science or history class that was about 45 to 50 minutes, that's what you might remember a piece, these minutes match up as well. So the biggest difference in our programming being that the content is integrated, it's connected, and it's applied based on student interest. Students will remember and retain more. Studies have shown that although they might test about the same as students receiving this content in traditional classes, they'll retain it because it was interesting to them. It was connected. It was based on real world application and not kind of forced and shoehorned. So if you think of your middle school experience, and I thought of mine too, and somehow I became a middle school teacher, but what do you remember learning or doing in your science or history classes from middle school? Which I guarantee you students in our middle school here will walk away with stronger memories of what they learned and did. The project-based learning is always co-taught, which is also important to note, with teachers with varied experience or experts in the spaces. So it would be nearly impossible to expect a teacher to teach PBL and have expertise in, like, strong expertise in all the sciences and in engineering and in history as well. So PBL is co-taught with teachers that have expertise in the different spaces. So here are the competencies. This is just a small snapshot for science and history this year for the middle school. So if you notice how the competencies are colored, if you look to the top right box, that's because they're not just content standards, but they're based on the life skills from our portrait of a graduate. So they're focused around logic and reasoning, problem solving, self-regulation, strategic foresight, and global competence. So they're based on these life skills from the portrait of a graduate that we're trying to instill in our students. And so if you see here at let's see, science and trimester 1, planning and carrying out investigations, that pink box there. Planning and carrying out investigations, it's really about building up capacity in logic and reasoning. And so now when you think about planning and carrying out investigations, that is incredibly broad. It's one of the next generation science standard practices. So meaning it's skills needed for good scientists. We know to be a scientist, you need to plan and carry out investigations. But remember, it isn't just this vague of planning and carrying out investigations. It's within earth science for this past trimester. So that means focusing on planning and carrying out investigations around things. We saw students planning and carrying out investigations around microplastics and impact on humans, as an example. So they're still learning that content that they need, but the focus is on the skills first and not the content. So I thought it would be helpful if you can move to the next slide, and there's a lot on here too, to look at the next generation science standards and to kind of break this down a little bit more. The next generation science standards or the national science standards are adopted by schools. Nationally, before they came out, we were in dire need for creation of new science standards to really be able to compete globally in innovation, technology, and science advances. So next generation science standards came out, I believe, in 2013, 2015. And the focus was really on, this was a huge shift in prior science instruction in schools, was focused on enabling students to learn science by doing science, right? To learn by doing, which is kind of our motto here at Bennett. And so the next generation science standards, they were designed to integrate 3 dimensions. And those dimensions are disciplinary core ideas. This is what's pictured in purple on the slide. So if you look at the Earth and human activity example, I have that kind of arrow there. There are 5 content standards around Earth and human activity. So it was first, what are these content standards that we need in different topics? Then the other dimension was cross-cutting concepts, meaning we need to be integrating other skills here in science, like patterns, finding patterns, cause and effect, systems, understanding systems, interdependence, etc. And the adoption of these, and then the third dimension is science and engineering. So it's kind of this like third component. The adoption of these successfully require really a major shift in classroom instruction and learning. This work really had huge changes in kind of science education. Is super dramatic when it came out, and still is. What's problematic is that most schools are not able to adopt them with true integrity. It is nearly impossible, the way schools are designed, to teach all of this content. So look at the arrow I drew. Those five content skills, that's just an example of one kind of pulled out. But it is nearly impossible to cover all of that content in 1 year while integrating cross-cutting skills. So while focusing on the skills that they need, like understanding cause and effect, and science and engineering, when you have a 45 to 50-minute class and your grading system is designed to only measure the student's understanding, and when I say understanding, that's a very generous word, I think, but your assessments system or your grading system is only designed to measure the student's ability to understand content. So more and more schools are trying to do the work of moving towards competency-based assessment for this reason, to focus on skill development. But overhauling a system is very different than one like Bennett's that was intentionally designed that way from the beginning, to focus on skills first. So the priority isn't content coverage, it's skill development first and foremost. We have the ability to look up any facts and skills. So memorizing and focusing on that first versus focusing on skill development seems backwards. But to overhaul that in a system whose grading system is designed that way is nearly impossible. So here at Bennett, it kind of flips the hierarchy of learning priorities. That in our competency map, when you go back to that slide, we are focusing on, thank you, we are focusing on the skills first. So this is just a snapshot of the skills of needed for good scientists. And then even on the following slide, go one more for me, thank you. These are the skills. These are from Next Generation Science Standards. These are what they call their practices or skills of asking questions and defining problems, developing and using models, planning and carrying out investigations. And so, yes, we need to do these things. We need to know how to plan and carry out investigations that are around earth science and that focus on earth science content, and that also focus on life science and physical science. They don't need to be all set together in one grade level. And the priority needs to be our ability to plan and carry out investigations, not our memorization of maybe that content first. So let's look at, I thought it would be good to just include skill development example in another subject like writing. So for example, what problem solving in writing looks like. So writing is incredibly complex. If you think about different components of writing, how students are also kind of focusing on problem solving is their ability to generate ideas. So think about writer's block. Teaching adolescents for years, it's hard when they are focused on specific styles of writing and kind of forced into that. So generating ideas, the planning, the revision process, how their ability to be able to problem solve and revise their own writing, and then spelling strategies even. And so you can also see here, which is why I included how the complexity increases. So you see that skill development within a subject area, so problem solving within writing, but then you also see they're emerging, developing, accomplishing, and extending, and how that just focusing on generating ideas, how it moves from at the emerging, that beginning level, can you brainstorm different ideas for their writing and experiment using different strategies to come up with new ideas, all the way to extending. And extending would be that you can independently use strategies that work best for you as an individual and for your intended audience. So you know what works best for you. You can draw from different strategies, but now you're also starting to think outside, yourself as a learner, and you're thinking more about your audience too and who you're writing to generate ideas. So I think it's also important to kind of see that continuum. It's also nice when thinking about it empowers students in their learning journey. So a student may be in the emerging stage of generating ideas. A middle school student may really struggle with writer's block at the initial stages. But once they get past that, they could have strengths in planning or revision. So students get a clearer picture of themselves as writers and their strengths and areas for growth too, rather than just a generalization in that overall subject area. Okay, so now I wanted to talk about facilities and how this will change coming online in the fall, this coming fall. We will be getting the keys this summer and moving into our new space for the fall of next year. And so I wanted to share updates for middle school specifically and what this will look like. So this is on a picture of the lower level. Right now, where the on the lower level where the middle school cafeteria is not really a cafeteria. It looks like a room if you've been in it. It's where the book fair was. If you're not sure, it's next to the gym, that gym there, and the music room. It's a pretty small space. It doesn't have windows. So the cafeteria, true cafeteria, will be created, and how this, what this looks like is it will be extended into the room next to it, which has windows, and so it's nearly doubling in size. So if you see that little X there, that wall is coming down. There'll be windows. It's nearly doubling in size. There will be vending. There'll be more kind of lounge space as well as additional cafeteria seating in the space. And so this cafeteria will be for our middle and upper school students. They will never have lunch together. They will have separate times, but it will be a cafeteria space designed for adolescents. The purple box on this slide here represents the additional setup of the stage there. So right now you see kind of that lifted up part. It is a stage, but there aren't any curtains. There's kind of that closed wall. You can pull any seating into that gym area. But we are adding in curtains and lights, and then working on sound options as well, so that it can be a fully functioning stage space as needed. But there's also a stage option for smaller productions in our new wing that has kind of a tiered step auditorium seating, and it's a smaller, for more smaller productions that can be possible in that space as well. So then on the first floor, I wanted to describe what the first floor will look like now. We have where the purple star is, that is our current entryway. That is where our 3-year-olds through our 18-year-olds enter the building. So starting next year, the purple star is the entry point for our middle and upper school students, and the green is the entryway for our early childhood and lower school. Now, there's a significant difference between 5th graders and 12th graders. They're not entering at the same time, nor will they be in any of these spaces at the same time. Middle school's arrival and dismissal still matches the early childhood and lower school. So in that purple entryway, our 5th through 8th graders will get to enter, while our preschool through 4th graders are entering in the green. For dismissal time, they have the same dismissal. Our high schoolers don't start till 9 a.m. and they end school at 3:45. So that entry point will be solely for middle schoolers as they're coming in. On that first floor there too, there will be, off of the entry point, there'll be an additional art studio, there will be a sound studio, and then a large science lab on that, in that back space there. So then on the next 2 floors, I want to share the additional classrooms as we think about, and I'll talk about numbers and how we're growing. We need to have just additional classrooms. So there will be 2 more additional classrooms for middle school, specifically on what it was our phase 2 wing. 2 here, and then move to the next slide for me. And then 4 more. So 6 total of just additional classrooms, just regular classrooms. So not a lab, not an art studio, just additional classroom spaces, which I thought was important to add. And so you see the entire 3rd floor actually being completely for middle school, which also gives them direct access to the gym. So then on the 4th floor, if we take a look, there's gym accessibility right off of the 3rd floor for the entire middle school. And the 4th floor actually has direct access to the upper indoor track. But so in that gym, there is a full basketball court with bleacher seating, storage, with an office, and locker rooms. And so that is directly off of our middle school space, which is very exciting. Once they get to see that, right now you can see the size of it in space, which is exciting for some of the adults that have gone in the tour. But when the kids get to see that, it's just going to be a true gym for them. Will be such a huge change. Okay, so then I wanted to share just middle school upcoming enrollment so that you get a sense of how it is growing. So next year, the total enrollment will be projected to be about 83. And so total enrollment. And what this will look like next year is with 2 sections of 5th grade and then 1 section each of 6th through 8th grade. And then 2 years out, by 25-26, with the total enrollment being about 100, we will have 2 sections of 5th and 6th each. So 2 sections of 5th grade and 2 sections of 6th grade. And then 1 section each of 7th and 8th grade. The teaching team will begin to work more closely in bands of 5th and 6th and 7th and 8th. So then by 2027, 2028, and beyond, having the total enrollment goal to be about 150 with 2 sections each of 5th through 8th grade. So 2 sections of 5th, 2 of 6th, 2 of 7th, 2 of 8th. And the teaching team will be working in a 5th and 6th grade band and a 7th and 8th grade band. So in its design was to have banding be with 5th and 6th working together, which developmentally are very aligned, and 7th and 8th working together, developmentally very aligned. They currently do that. They go to lunch and recess together in that. They're in PBL together in those bands. But the teaching team does teach across all. So as we grow, we will have teaching teams with expertise specifically within those bands. So when you think about going back to what I mentioned earlier around the priority for relationships in adolescence, you won't have teachers that are teaching two sections across 5th through 8th grade that have students across all of those sections. So even though the numbers are larger, you still have the focus on smaller relationships, but still with varied expertise in the subject areas. Just with growing numbers, I wanted to mention too, advisory will always be a maximum of 12 to 1 student to teacher ratio. So meaning eventually, when we have 2 sections of 5th grade, that would be 4 advisors. So there might be 2 sections of 5th grade, but there's 2 advisors per each. So just because we're growing doesn't mean that we're not going to have increase that student to teacher ratio for advisory, because that is a core component of the program and really important. And project-based learning will still be team taught with faculty members and backgrounds in both the humanities and STEM areas. So all of those elements that exist now will still exist as we grow. So then looking at the hiring plan, I just wanted to share just a reminder or a sharing out, if this is new for you, of new roles that were recently hired. So we did add an additional counselor, so that we have one just for middle school. She is currently supports our 4th grade as well, which helps with that transition into middle school then too, and already having those relationships. We did add an additional learning resource teacher this year, specifically for middle school, and we did add a Spanish teacher, full-time Spanish teacher for middle and upper school this year as well. So now going into next year for 24-25, we are prioritizing hiring an art teacher, an athletic director, 1 to 2 middle school teachers, and 1 assistant teacher. Then for the following year, so this is our 2-year hiring plan then, for the following year, 1 to 2 middle school teachers, and then looking at our administrative structure, because at that point is when our numbers for enrollment will have increased and increased outside of our divisions, our early childhood and lower school too. So we will still have a director of middle and upper school. It is really important to have that consistency, and a head of program for middle and upper school. So those two, it's important to have a head of program that oversees all of the competency-based and project-based learning across middle and upper school, and not have that become disjointed. But we will have additional support roles per division. So whether that be, and this is me saying, I don't want to fully commit to a title, whether that be an assistant division director for middle school, an assistant division director for upper school, or just supportive administrative role per division. So that title might look different. But at that point is when the enrollment will get larger, and we do have plans for more administrative support as well. I will share with the 1 to 2 middle school teachers why the difference is it really, as we create the schedule, and I'll share more of what the schedule will look like, and depending on teachers' backgrounds and expertise, that kind of depends a little bit too. So right now we have a fabulous teacher who has actually taught middle school across disciplines, which is very rare. So is able to teach across disciplines. Some might be have one specific discipline, so there's some kind of variation in that and hires, but also in the schedule as well as we look to numbers. So it might be more beneficial, even though we don't need 2 teachers potentially for next year, to have them hired ahead of time as opposed to waiting till when we totally do need it, because that additional support would be helpful. So it's either going to be 1 to 2 either this year or the following. So then I wanted to share just the middle school schedule. So how will the schedule change? If you think about it, I just shared how much the numbers will change, and we're going from 1 section of middle school to 2 sections per grade level. And so I thought it was really important to share that the schedule really won't change. So on the left-hand side is the current middle school schedule. And this is I will say there will be liberties in this. This is not exactly what it's going to look like. So the specials classes may be at different times, or things like that. The classes may fall at different times. But if you look at the current schedule, they will always start with advisory. That will exist no matter how large we are, that they're going to start with that block of advisory. It is important. It is so important to start their day that way. And it's so important to have a checkout time at the end of the day. They will have their blocks of math and ELA, so your English language arts, those core classes, and then having a longer block of project-based learning that is integrated, that has teachers with different backgrounds in subject areas. And if you look so the schedule on the left shows this is 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th. But as we move to a schedule with 2 sections per grade level, now the example you can kind of see, so instead of across 5th or 8th, we're working in bands. So we have 5th grade section 1, 5th grade section 2, 6th grade section 1, 6th grade section 2. So you still have, notice how PBL still shifted to be at the same time. You still have opportunities in lunch and recess for your 5th and 6th grade to come together across bands. But they don't have less time in anything. They'll have teachers now. We'll have more teachers that they're able to teach specifically in bands. And then there'll be one that exists very similarly to the 7th and 8th with a different set of teachers. So they will switch classes as they do with teachers with backgrounds in the subject areas. So there is a specific teacher of math, a specific teacher of English language arts, and PBL, project-based learning time, is co-taught. But they always start their day with that advisor and end their day with that advisor every day. Wednesdays, so this is the typical Monday through Friday schedule, but Wednesday's schedule I did want to share. We have been working to build a plan to create a full day option. And we do have lessons learned that I'll share. If there are current middle school families on here, you are well aware. We worked to kind of expand programming this year and wanted to have a full day option, and found that it is too large of a demand for the auxiliary program to plan. It just can't be part of the auxiliary program if we want to create a full day option. So we need to have educators. There need to be actual classes for students to be more invested. And for them to be actual classes, they have to be tied to competencies. So they're getting feedback on their learning, and with more time with their teachers during that day as well. So not having this half day that is as long as it currently is. We needed more space, and we will have that next year. So we will have a full day option. We are working to have a full day option for middle school for this 3rd trimester, having the classes added on, but then starting next year, having them have actual classes for that rest of that day is important, and that they're getting feedback and it's tied to competencies too. So lessons learned, we learned, has to be part of the program. It cannot be part of auxiliary program and kind of separate. Middle school athletics and clubs. So I did mention for hiring that a top priority for hiring for this year coming into next year is an athletic director. So hoping they will be here in the summer and can even kind of do some consulting in the spring even. But I wanted to share the athletic director's top priorities that they'll be given. Is 1, to initiate league entry for middle school and upper school. So that will be their work, whether they can start in the spring or start consulting or summer, to initiate league entry for this coming school year for middle and upper school, to prioritize consistent offerings and balance additional student choice. So we really have been, up until this point, kind of solely following student choice, which is incredibly important. What are they interested in? But doing that each trimester, each year, is we are then unable to offer consistent offerings and really build momentum in any area. So their work will be to prioritize consistent offerings, meaning, so athletic examples, meaning that we will always have basketball teams, volleyball, track, cross country, and then balancing that with additional student choice, meaning options such as self-defense, which they were interested in. So that will be their role. We will have a set list of what we're always prioritizing, what we're competing in leagues, so that can continue on. Their other top priorities will be to manage new equipment needs. Now that we will have a full-size gym, we will need new equipment for that full-size gym that we're able to use, which is exciting, which will make a more robust kind of athletic program, but also overall physical education program as well. And then to schedule and host games, tournaments, or intramurals, so that you can also be engaged in that, and we can use that beautiful space here to host. And then looking at kind of clubs and auxiliary programs, top priorities will be, again, to prioritize consistent offerings and balance additional student choice. So much of every trimester surveying the students of what they're interested in, they have lots of ideas and they change, and they're wonderful because we're able to follow what they're interested in. But again, then we're not able to kind of build momentum in areas. So the major priorities in here would be drama and having that option, and not having it interfere with any other clubs that may come on, and then also band. Now we have large enough numbers that we are able to offer a consistent band and build a band program ongoing. And again, not have some of the student kind of additional choices necessarily take away from our ability to offer those things. But then still have things if students are interested in starting up a club, that they can find a moderator and still have that ability to do so. But that would be secondary. So then I wanted to share some middle school staples that just consistently middle schoolers will start the year with a retreat at the beginning of the year. It is so important for our adolescents to have a retreat where they're outside of school. A lot of times they're outdoors and in nature, to just focus on team building and connecting. It's great when there are new students, but also for students that have been together for years, to see middle school students cheer each other on when they're trying to climb large walls or rope courses. It's just a great way to build kind of morale and that sense of community, which is so important and critical. And so they'll always have retreat at the beginning of the year. Towards the beginning of the year, they will always have an overnight trip every year, starting in 6th grade. And so right now it has been really difficult planning overnight trips for several reasons. As we came out of the pandemic, none of that was obviously planned, or we weren't traveling. And so we didn't have consistent kind of plans or companies to draw upon. But it's also been difficult with the smaller sections. So currently having such a small class in our 8th grade makes it hard to plan an 8th grade class trip, one for just the number of students, but you really have to plan with another school, either have another school or you have to bring other grade levels with. So it's kind of impacted the whole trip planning, which actually, if there are middle school parents that are tuned in now, there'll be a communication that I believe is coming out next week with all the confirmed trips and dates. But heading into next year and moving forward, because we will have larger numbers, we will have planned going into the year, moving forward, the trips for the year. It really, truly has been hard with those small sections that are in the 7th and 8th grade. And so those are the trip expectations. When I say overnight too, I do want to clarify there will be an overnight trip every year starting in 6th grade, but it may not be a separate trip than the retreat. It may be that the retreat is a couple nights overnight, and then they take a day trip to somewhere in the Midwest. And so there will always be an overnight trip and always be a retreat. They could be one and the same. The middle school team was talking about wanting to do a camping trip with a certain group of students here because they just seem to really be excited about it. So just knowing that overnight is not necessarily a standard. We are always going to this place in 6th grade, this place in 7th, this in 8th. They will always have a dance within the middle school, for someone that's been there. And actually, many of you might have been at the Fall Fest to see the middle schoolers. It's kind of one of my favorite experiences. Currently, our middle school has dance all together 5th through 8th grade. Once we have 2 sections across the grades, we will have a separate 5, 6 and separate 7, 8 opportunities. So again, working within those bands. Middle School Olympic Games is coming up actually tomorrow for our students, and we have decided will be an annual event. The Middle School Olympic Games are actually designed and created by our upper school students. So the middle school students will be going off-site. They're going to another kind of gym facility, and they'll be led in different kind of Olympic style games and team building games and activities by upper school students. So it's a chance to connect with some of the upper school students, have an opportunity to be together, but also just be together offsite and kind of break up something to look forward to, a tradition, which is really important to have in that adolescent experience. And then demo days, or demo is short for demonstration days. Demonstration days are a part that begin in the middle school, and they occur at the end of every trimester. And so it is the culmination of their project-based learning where they have the opportunity to share out their project work. It is incredible. I wish we do not open the demo days up to the public, because for them just starting, off in middle school to share out what they're doing. We invite parents and guardians, so their direct family members, and then our teachers and students of the other grade levels in. That's enough, and there are plenty. It is pretty incredible to see them be able to share what they've learned throughout their trimester, and to see this first trimester, fifth graders for the first time just did a wonderful job for their first time. And I know going back to that kind of workload and stress, I know I had fifth grade students at home working at home on their projects, but it was from excitement and wanting to keep trying and kind of do better. But their ability to kind of speak out and share. I had a new student, a parent of a new student this year, come up to me and say, I filmed the entire thing. I didn't even know she would barely speak in school. And so to hear her sharing at a demonstration day with such confidence was like truly amazing. So, and it is incredible to see, especially students that have been here through the years and how much they've grown. So those are demonstration days at the end of each trimester, which is kind of a staple of the middle school experience. And then the family association and social events. So the family association has really been growing in the middle school and planning major events, which are exciting. So the picture here on the right shows the Fall Fest. It had great attendance, and I chose this photo specifically, even middle school boys were having a blast with the masquerade theme, which is exciting. But they're also planning Lock Under that's coming. So really trying to work at finding additional kind of social opportunities to bring the kids together, which is really exciting. It's nice to see the family association planning these like huge experiences and fun experiences for the kids. And then there were a few questions that came up as I put out ahead of time. If you had questions that you wanted to be addressed that didn't necessarily fit in from what I was sharing, so I just wanted to make sure I answered them, kind of around academic questions and concerns. So the first one was around without textbooks, how do we know they're learning what they need to? So kind of knowing when there are textbooks, and as parents or workbooks, as parents, maybe you're able to see that at home so you know what they're learning, but you also know, okay, this was also published by and based on research, so you know they're following and learning what they need to be learning. So how do we at Bennett know they're learning what they need to? And so what I wanted to share is kind of and I will follow up with, there was also another question on textbooks, specifically if we're not learning to read around textbooks, which I think is interesting, because if we think of our school experience, so much of what we read was through textbooks. So all of our informational reading was from textbooks. So it was like, how are we doing in that? How are they learning that without any textbooks? So one thing that we do have, and I don't necessarily always share these out, but we do use standardized norm reference assessments. And it's important to. It's important for us to see a couple things, to see individual student progress, and then also to see as a school, how are we doing nationally comparatively? And are there areas of strength, and are there areas that we can improve upon based on these measures? So we do use MAP testing in our middle school, so starting in third grade through eighth grade, which has national norm comparisons. And we do use AIMSweb, which is an internal screening tool in the areas of reading and math, and both are in the areas of reading and math. And AIMSweb, it doesn't have reports to share out. It's an internal screening tool really to monitor students' progress across time, but it does have national norm comparison. So when you look at the class as a whole, or grade levels as a whole, the school as a whole, you can see kind of how we're doing. So I wanted to share this out, knowing that these measures are a snapshot in time, but they are important for us to see how are we doing? How can we ensure that without textbooks, we know they're learning what they need to, right? So I pulled the fifth and sixth grade specifically, and not seventh and eighth, because seventh and eighth are such small class sizes. But if we think about this concern about the informational reading and textbooks, so they're not reading textbooks. So how are they doing in informational reading and their kind of literacy as a whole? So in the MAP report here, what you're looking at is the top left. It breaks down reading in the areas of literary, informational, and vocabulary. And you can see that as a whole, we can look at each of the areas that as a whole, it's actually very well-rounded. This chart here, what it shows us is you see the total number of students that had valid scores, so 20 students in the 5th grade in that top left box. And then you see the average, I'm just going to say the average score. And so the average score was 216. Now, down at the bottom, the second to the bottom box shows the grade level average, which was 204. So nationally, that means students at the 5th grade in reading, their average is 204.5. Bennett's average for 5th grade in this test in reading is 216.3. So you can see that's a huge difference. We would expect to be doing better. We're a private school. Our students have a lot more access than students do nationally, of course. But based on our model and project-based learning, we wouldn't assume for it to be that much larger. We would expect their learning to stick with them longer and for them to be able to apply it. But you can see that huge difference. And if you look at the breakdown in the colors here, it also shows you how many students are performing at the high average to high level. So you have over half of the students, and in fact, 80% of the students performing in the high average to high range, right? And 18 out of that 20 are at grade level and above. Okay, and the bottom right-hand corner, then the 6th grade, kind of says a similar thing. Overall, the grade level nationally, the grade level mean score is 210.2. So that means in the fall, this fall, 6th graders that took the MAP test in reading, the average was 210.2. Our 6th graders' average was 222. Huge difference of students and how they're performing. Again, if you look at the high average to high on the right-hand side, you can see over half of the students, and again, these numbers are really small on my screen, about 75% are scoring in the high average to high range. Okay, so we know without textbooks, we know they're learning what they need to. If you were to move out of state and go to a new school, we know they're learning what they need to as they move on to their next school experience at high school and then at the college level. And it's important for us to continue to look at these things. I didn't include, which I meant to, the breakdown of literary information and vocabulary, because we can see that too. And it's very well-rounded. But what's interesting in the breakdown is that we see more students scoring in the high range in informational text. So yeah, you don't need textbooks to be able to learn the skills needed for informational reading. Okay, so then the next slide, I shared AIMSweb as well. There isn't a report. This is an internal tool, so there isn't kind of a clean report or snapshot. So I took multiple snapshots here. But AIMSweb is an internal screener, again, that has national norm comparisons in the areas of math and reading. And so this is math specifically. And so you can see, and I can't remember if I did 5th or 6th. This is 6th grade. You can see, again, students falling in the well above average, and average range. And so compared to, you can see national norms of student growth too, which was, there wasn't a metric where I couldn't remove student names, but you can also see our growth compared to national growth, which is significant. And then here you just see that breakdown of how many students are scoring kind of in the above average to well above average range too. Then the next question, or I'm sorry, the next slide. How do I know how my child is performing? So that first question also kind of got at this too, I think, from the level of like, how does the school know? But then also, how do I know as a parent or guardian? How do I know how my child is performing? Well, it starts, we do have 4 conferences per year. And so it does start with, the year does start with an intake conference at the beginning of the year, just as we do in early childhood. We do in early childhood through our upper school. And that's the conference that's designed for you if you have goals for your child, to share more about your child and kind of initiate that parent, guardian, and teacher connection and relationship. And then the other 3 conferences are student-led. Student-led conferences were always the intention of our middle and upper school, and now we are finally doing them in both middle and upper school. It has always been the intention from its beginning design, but as a new program in its first couple years, there was so much explaining of the program that was needed from teacher to parent and guardian and asking of questions that it was really difficult to balance that with the priority of having students lead. So they are student-led, will always be, and that has always been the intention. because they're so powerful, and that students, they take more ownership over their learning. They improve their communication skills, and they learn to advocate for themselves too. But it empowers the students and gives them more agency. So just as we think about in our program and day to day, the students are co-creators of their learning, so should they be at their conferences too. They work with their teachers to prepare and reflect. So there is time leading up to that. It isn't just a kind of off the cuff and students are left on their own. They are a co-creator in that planning with their teachers. Before then, they are empowered to lead and reflect. There are also 6-week check-in calls. Those are short and sweet, but meant to check in, to share if there are concerns around updates, if there are great glows that are worth sharing out, but they are short and sweet in between the conferences when needed, just as we do in the lower grades as well. And there are 3 trimester reports, same thing. So at the end of each trimester, there is a competency-based report that shows across subject areas and each of the competencies on that. If I go back to that scale of emerging and developing, where your child falls, not just in the subject as a whole, but across each competency. So you get a sense of where are their strengths and then where are their areas they need to work on as well. And then students and parents have access to the learning management system, or LMS, that has comments on assignments or assessment measures and progress on competencies by subject area. And so this has actually been created internally. We have created this tool here at Bennett. We have used multiple tools between myself and our head of program, Marty Moran. We have tried multiple tools, but so many of the different learning management systems, their hierarchy doesn't fit a true competency-based program. So we have designed our own. We have been now working with it for about a solid year. And so now the teachers have developed a system for entry. So even just this first trimester, talking through the system of entry, and now we have expectations moving forward around kind of how to enter and what that feedback loop looks like for the students as well. And then lastly, one of the questions was, what can the students expect in the transition from 4th grade to middle school? So maybe they're not in 4th grade now, but maybe that's coming soon. And then what does that look like? Is it a giant kind of leap? I think about my middle school experience, went from I had one classroom teacher, and all of a sudden I have a ton. It was just, you kind of showed up for the day and you moved around from teacher to teacher. But we are working on more connections across division. So the example that I shared with you tomorrow is actually the middle school students will have the Olympics Day, where they're going off-site for team building with some of the upper school students. And that will be a yearly thing. But we will have opportunity during Spirit Week for 4th graders and middle school connection. So we have been working across divisions on that importance to be able to have experiences and build relationships with each other. They will have an official moving up day in spring, which we will do in the lower grades as well. But what's so important about a moving up day in the spring is that they have a chance, while they're with their current classmates and current teacher that they know, to be able to go and visit the space with the middle school teachers, to be able to ask questions. They'll share out a little bit more. They get to ask questions with their classmates and their current teacher as they're kind of starting to wrap their heads around that change and starting to think more about 5th grade's right around the corner for us. And then you may have noticed, if you don't have a current middle schooler, but in all of our communication at the beginning of the year, which I know there is a lot, is around orientation/open house. And it's because it's an open house for early childhood and lower school, but it's an orientation day for our middle and actually upper school students. And what the orientation means is that middle schools have a whole orientation experience. So it's different than just an open house where you get to kind of come in and preview. They meet all of their teachers. They go through their schedule all before the first day of school. And so it's really important for them to be in that space, and the spaces that they will be in, and the faces that they will be with before the day start, before the first day of school starts. And so they have a full orientation, and where they do spend a good chunk of that time with their advisor as well. That introduction is there, where they do some kind of team building activity. And so that is before their first day of school begins. So There are plenty of opportunities for fourth graders to have that kind of preview coming into middle school, which is important. Knowing, traveling from different teachers and having more than your one or two teachers is a big shift. And so now I just want to leave time if there are any questions. I was expecting to see them throughout. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Hopefully I tried to cover the different areas about the program and future growth across the years. It is really, really exciting to think about next year and the new building coming online, and watching it in person and getting to go and see the space as it's coming up, is knowing that it is real and right around the corner. It's very exciting. Any questions? If you're on, please feel free to drop in. One thing I'll share while I give some wait time to a question that I've shared before, but in coming to Bennett, what really drew me to Bennett was actually the design of the upper school and the potential in the design of the middle school. And I love talking about our middle school experience. And so talking about it with families that get to move into that, and just how unique it truly is, and being in a space that the program is designed for the students in it all the way through 3 years old through 18 years old is pretty incredible. And that's coming from not just where I was prior to here in another independent school, but also being on accrediting teams and being in a cohort of the other independent schools here in Chicago. Just knowing and having that opportunity to start at a place that is focusing on the students of today and tomorrow and those adolescents is just exciting to me, and really what drew me ultimately here to Bennett. Okay. Everyone made it very easy for me. No questions. So thank you for tuning in. I look forward to, I'll be offering listen to learn sessions, and also upcoming monthly coffees after we return from winter break. So I look forward to seeing more of you then. Thank you.